Start reading in verse number 11. I have read this past 2 weeks, Sunday morning, and I started to just start with verse number 25 this morning, but I feel impressed that we would back up and read the entirety of the story again. Luke chapter number 15, verse number 11. And he said, a certain man had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falleth to me. And he divided unto them his living. Not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. You listen to me, child of God. If you find yourself in the far country, you will always end with you wasting your substance. When he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine in the land, and he began to be in want. And he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into the fields to feed swine. And he would have fain have filled his belly with the husk that the swine did eat, and no man gave unto him. When he had came to himself, he said, How many hired servants of my father's have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. And he arose and came to his father, but when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him, and had compassion, and ran, and fell on his neck, and kissed him. And the son said unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven, and in thy sight, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. But the father said to his servants, Bring forth the best robe, and put it on him, and put a ring on his feet, and shoes on his feet, and bring hither the fatted calf, and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead, and is alive again. He was lost, and is found. And they began to be merry. Notice that when he came back to the father's house, the very first thing he said was, I have sinned against heaven. Some of you have found yourself in a far country, and you've tried to make your way back, and you've tried to apologize to mom and daddy, or you've tried to apologize to a family that you've hurt maybe. But the reality is, you hadn't truly had an honest conversation with the Lord yet. Verse 25, Now his elder son was in the field. And as he came and drew nigh to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked them what these things meant. And he said unto him, Thy brother is come, and thy father hath killed the fatted calf, because he hath received him safe and sound. And he was angry, and would not go in. Therefore came his father out and entreated him, and he answering him said to his father, Lo, these many years do I serve thee, neither transgressed I at any time thy commandment. And yet thou never gavest me a kid, that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this thy son was come, notice he wouldn't even call him his brother, which hath devoured thy living with harlots, thou hast called for him the fatted calf. And he said unto him, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. It was meet that we should make merry and be glad, for this thy brother was dead, and is alive again, and was lost, and is found. I want you to know several things just by way of introduction this morning. Verse number 25, I want you to notice the elder son place. Now we notice that the younger son found himself in the far country. We noticed that the father stayed at the father's house. We preached last week, and I reminded you that though the father wanted his son back, and though he longed for him to be back, and though he looked for him every day, we don't read anywhere where he went down to the far country himself. He stayed at the father's house. I encourage you parents, you have wayward children, grandparents, you have wayward grandchildren, you stay faithful so that when they come back, you're where you're supposed to be. But I noticed the older brother, his place, verse number 25, now his elder son was in the field. The field in the life of the Christian represents that place of service, that place of ministry. It is that we call it the field. Well, what field are you in? What field are you going to? The mission field. It's a place where we labor, a place where souls are won, a place where you're serving the Lord. What field is it that you're laboring in? And here he finds his place in the field. He is where he ought to be. He is doing what he ought to be doing. He hasn't drifted out. He isn't doing the things that the younger son's doing. He's not participating in the things or the ways of the world. He's not, in a life of sin. And though there's no doubt, as all of us do, he's making mistakes and he's doing things he shouldn't do. But he's not strayed away. He's just faithfully serving, faithfully every day getting up and being what he's supposed to be. I notice his place. Then I notice his perspective. Look with me in verse number 25. And as he came and drew nigh to the house, when he gets close to the father's house, he heard music and dancing. So we see his approaching. He heard the music and the dancing as he approached. I thought, isn't it a little unusual that he didn't notice the father running out to meet the son? He didn't notice the reunion that had took place earlier. I can't imagine that the father is quiet as he runs out to meet the son. I can't imagine that the father isn't excitedly making a scene as he's running out to meet his son who has returned. I can't imagine that it doesn't draw the attention of anybody outside. And yet as he approaches, he hasn't noticed anything going on. He hasn't noticed anything taking place. He had not seen them hugging and rejoicing together outside. His approach. I wonder, as we gathered in the Father's house this morning, what was it? How was our approach? What did we hear? What did we see? What did we think as we began to walk into the house? Notice his asking in verse number 26. He called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. It doesn't even cross his mind that maybe his brother's home. It doesn't even begin to enter into his mind that, man, Daddy's throwing a party. What in the world? Why? It's not his birthday. It's not an anniversary. It's not anything special. It's not, a time of the year when we ought to be celebrating. What in the world is taking place? Why is there music and dancing? What is going on? And the thought of his younger brother having come home doesn't even cross his mind. What a place to be in. That we would come to church on Sunday mornings and the thought of sinners getting saved doesn't enter our mind. But what everybody's wearing, what new vehicle somebody's driving, what new gossip we've got to share. We thought about all that. But man, when we walked in the Father's house, heard the music, heard the shouting, we didn't think maybe somebody will get saved today. Maybe some prodigal son would come home today. Maybe somebody will find help today. Maybe somebody will get right. No, it's... Wonder where so-and-so is. Why ain't they here? They ain't been here in weeks. I wonder... What is it? What was our perspective on church this morning? Notice his problem. Verse number 28. It's summed up in 4 words. And he was angry. The fact that his brother is home and is alive and that his daddy has thrown a party for him makes him mad. He gets angry. He gets angry. You'd be surprised how many people get upset when folks get right. You'd be surprised at how many people get upset because we got visitors sitting in their seat. You'd be surprised at how many people get upset because folks are finding help. You say, I just can't. I find it hard to fathom too, but it happens. Instead of being thankful that new people are coming in, instead of being thankful that there's help to be given, instead of being thankful that folks are getting right and people are getting saved, all kinds of conversations would take place. His problem? He was angry. I want to break down his problem this morning and look at it in several ways and deal with the brother this morning. We've dealt with the younger son being prodigal, and let me say this morning, if you find yourself in the far country, there is hope. You don't have to stay there. Let me say this morning that if you have wasted your substance in riotous living, there is a place that you can come and get right and get help, and that's at the Father's house. And though the older son may not have wanted him there, the father sure enough wanted him there. And the older son, does not get to make the decisions at the Father's house. As long as the Father's alive, the Father gets to make the decisions. And this morning, may I say that God the Father is alive and well, sitting on the throne of heaven. And so He's the one that gets to make the decisions around His house this morning. We can get bitter and we can get upset and we can be whatever way we want to be. But the reality is this morning, if somebody wants to get right with God, it's up to God. If somebody wants to get saved, it's in His hands, not mine or yours this morning. We find that whether we would rejoice or not about it, the Bible says that when one comes to know Christ, when one gets saved, that there's rejoicing in the presence of angels. We read that verse and we think, man, the angels rejoice when somebody gets saved. Oh no, the angels don't understand salvation. They don't understand sin, and they don't understand doing wrong. They don't understand redemption. It's not the angels doing the rejoicing. It's rejoicing in the presence of the angels. Tell you this morning, who rejoices when a sinner gets saved? Who rejoices when a prodigal son comes home? God the Father rejoices. God the Son, God the Holy Ghost rejoices this morning. Oh, but I believe there's a great cloud of witnesses described over in Hebrews chapter number 12 that rejoices in the presence of angels. Why? Because they understand salvation. They understand redemption. They understand sin and waywardness. They understand coming back to the Father's house. What was the older son's problem? I say, first of all, he was prideful. Look at it. He starts off by simply saying, I didn't do that. I didn't waste your substance. I didn't leave the house. I didn't go away. I didn't do you wrong. I have been faithful. We see us boasting. I've stayed faithful. I've been serving you. Why is it that you're throwing him a party? I'm the one who stayed faithful. I'm the one that kept serving. I'm the one that hadn't got out. I'm the one that hasn't went. Why are you throwing him up? Why are you getting excited over the one that's come home? Why aren't you all excited over the fact that I didn't go nowhere? His boasting. Notice his belittling. That's what pride does. It causes you to boast. I'm doing more, or I haven't done what they did. I haven't failed like they failed, or I've accomplished more than they've accomplished. I've been what I'm supposed to be. But notice the belittling. I didn't devour your substance with harlots. I didn't mess around like he did. I hadn't been where he can't just say, look what I'm doing. He also has to say, look what he did. I know some people, they're not necessarily going to boast and say, look at what I'm doing. But what they will do is point out what everybody else isn't doing. Hoping that you'll notice who is doing. You can be just as proud in belittling as you can in boasting. I notice The Bible's perspective of pride this morning, though. Proverbs 16:18 says, pride goeth before destruction, and an haughty spirit before a fall. Proverbs 29:23 says, a man's pride shall bring him low, but honor shall uphold the humble in spirit. May I remind you this morning that Satan was not kicked out of heaven for drinking. He wasn't kicked out of heaven for doing drugs. He wasn't kicked out of heaven for fornicating or for lying or for stealing or for murder. He was thrown out because of his pride. Because of his pride. I noticed the binding of pride. Psalm 73:6 says, therefore pride compasseth them about as a chain. Violence covereth them as a garment. Pride will bind you up. Pride will constrain you and constrict you. It will keep you from being able to accomplish what you need to for the Lord. It works as a process of binding. Notice the bitterness of pride. Proverbs 13:10 says, only by pride cometh contention. You realize that bitterness, he said contention, bitterness, only by pride. The only way that you get bitter is through pride. Yep. Oh, preacher, I've been bitter before, but I wasn't prideful. Yeah, you were. The reason you got bitter is because you thought that shouldn't have happened to you. Is because you thought they shouldn't have treated you that way. You thought you deserved better. You thought you were better. The whole reason you got bitter is because you had pride. But preacher, I didn't do anything wrong. They're the ones who wronged me. The reason you got bitter over it because you thought a lot more yourself than you should have been thinking. I've quoted this often, but it rings true this morning. And it was, I believe, Spurgeon that was, and I give credit to him every time I quote it. But his men come to him and said, Miss Spurgeon, there's people that are talking about you, and they're running you down, and they're making claims about you that aren't true. He said, what would you like us to do about it? And Spurgeon said, what are they saying? And they told him, and he said, don't do anything. Don't do anything. They said, don't you want us to go handle it? We can put a stop to it. And he said, no. He said, for if they were telling the truth, it'd be far worse. Wow. I'm talking about the Prince of Preachers. We're talking about somebody who was living right and doing right. And we're talking about somebody God used. He says, oh, if they were telling the truth about me, it'd be far worse. He had the right perspective of himself. The bitterness of pride. See, the breaking of pride. Proverbs 29:23 says, a man's pride shall bring him low, but honor shall uphold the humble in spirit. Proverbs 11:2, when pride cometh, then cometh shame, but with the lowly is wisdom. There's a statement I made in my younger years of preaching that haunts me to this day. I made a statement, said it several times while preaching about folks that had gotten messed up and people that had made a mistake, and said, I'll never do that. You won't find me doing those things. You won't find me looking at that. You won't find me out there. You won't find me participating in that. Come on, preacher. Prideful statement. And guess where it landed me? Nobody's fault but my own. I all but invited Satan to tempt me. All but begged Satan to tempt me. And he did. And you know what I found out? That I am no match for him. But we, me and God the Holy Ghost, we can handle him. But me, I'm no match for him. The breaking of pride. Pride, whether it's through belittling or whether it's through boasting, will always end with a breaking. Notice the pridefulness of the older son. Notice the pharisaical behavior of the older son. So in pride, he says, I didn't do that. But with his Pharisaical attitude, he says, I'm better than that. Listen, look at Luke chapter number 18. Luke chapter number 18, just a couple pages over. Verse number 9. Says, and he spake this parable unto certain which trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. These are the Pharisees he's talking about. 2 men went up into the temple to pray, the one a Pharisee, the other a publican. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus within himself, God, I thank thee that I am not as other men are, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this publican. I fast twice in the week. I give tithes of all that I possess. And the publican, standing afar off, would not lift up so much as his eyes unto heaven, but smote upon his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For every one that exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. It is the younger son that gets exalted. The older son, he hasn't left the father's house. He has faithfully served. He has faithfully been in his place. He has faithfully tried to be obedient to the father. And yet, it's the younger son that gets exalted. You say, yeah, but he went out into the world and he wasted his substance and he did things he shouldn't have done. Oh, and along the way, he humbled himself. So when he comes back, he's exalted. And the older son, he is humbled. He's brought down. I want you to see the foundation of the Pharisaical attitude, and it is what we just talked about, pride. For without pride, you'll not be Pharisaical. For without pride, you'll not be judgmental. Do you realize that in a 34-word prayer that we just read by the Pharisee, he used the first-person pronoun 6 times? That is 1 in every 6 words he talked about himself. 1 in every 6 words he talked about himself. The foundation of the Pharisaical attitude is themselves. Look at what I'm doing. Look at what I've accomplished. Look at what I deserve better. I am better. Notice the focus of the Pharisee. I'm not like the publican. I don't do what he's done. The older brother was the same way. I have served you. I have been faithful. I didn't leave the house. He devoured your substance. He was laying with harlots. Sounds like my kids when they get in trouble. Yeah, but they were doing this and they were doing that. I'm not interested in what they were doing right now. I'm interested in what you were doing. His focus was on the failure of others. I'm glad I'm not the disgrace that he is. The failure of the Pharisee, the older son, he failed to have a real relationship with his father. He wasn't interested in having a real relationship with his father. He was just interested in hanging around to get everything that was left. Just hanging around to get the reward. He failed to have a genuine concern for the souls of men. I notice lastly, I see his pride. I see his Pharisaical behavior. But I notice his pouting. You didn't throw me a party. You didn't recognize what I've been doing. A prideful and a Pharisaical attitude will always lead to pouting. He could not rejoice over his brother being home for pouting. The father had to take time away from his rejoicing to deal with the pouting of the brother. He couldn't be happy for his younger son returning safe and sound. He couldn't truly rejoice in the fact that his younger son was home. He couldn't truly rejoice in the fact that he was still alive because he was having to deal with the older brother and his pouting. Look at me. What about me? I'm here. You didn't call my name, and you didn't recognize me, and you didn't acknowledge me, and you didn't thank me, and you didn't shake my hand, and you didn't talk about me, and you didn't. If you have to be coddled and caressed to stay faithful, something's wrong. If you have to be constantly patted on the back or acknowledged for your labor, then you're serving for the wrong reason. If you constantly have to post pictures of your labor for the Lord on social media, come on, preacher, maybe you're serving for the wrong reason. Right. Your pouting will end up being a stumbling block for others and yourself. Nothing aggravates me more than to watch my kids pout when they don't get their way. I mean, when they get in trouble, rather than just, owning it, apologizing, and let's move on, they will pick on David every now and then. He's got the biggest poochy lip. That thing will drag the floor about near. And he'll stick that thing. Just waiting and begging you to ask what's wrong. You don't acknowledge it, he'll. We do the same thing. You're right. That's exactly right, preacher. We do the same thing. Why are you blessing them? What about me? I'm serving you. I'm staying faithful. I'm where I'm supposed to. What? Some of you had a hard time walking in this morning for tripping over your lip. Here's the reality of the story. It is this, that the older brother was just as prodigal as the younger son. Though he had not left the house, he had not partook in any gross acts, his heart was just as far away as the younger son's had been, filled with pride and contention. He was just as far away spiritually, though he never left physically. Your thoughts, when you hear of someone falling, will tell you a lot about where you are spiritually. Is your thought process, I knew that was going to happen. I saw it coming. Yeah. I could have told you. Yep. Oh, if they'd have just listened. How does your heart break for where they're going to end up? What it may take to get them back? Your actions when you know someone is messed up will tell you a lot about where you are spiritually. You try to push them away, or you try to bring them back in. I wonder this morning, we may not be in the far country, may not have even left the Father's house, but we would find ourselves prodigal. Not because we're wasting our substance with riotous living, but because we're wasting our substance with prideful hearts. Let's stand this morning.